Economics is the field of knowledge about how individuals and groups obtain, use, and share resources. People make choices and decisions about how to use their resources, time, their talent, their money, their skills, and the business of studying the factors and the forces that influence how individual choices about how to use resources is done is a big 50-cent word called microeconomics. Say microeconomics. Okay, microeconomics is the business of understanding how individual choices about resource allocation and use is done. But our individual and our group choices have aggregate consequences. If you put all our individual choices and all the factors of our individual choices together, they have a collective, they have a cumulative, they have a big influence. And when we talk about the aggregate or the collective impact of our choices about how to use resources, we're talking about a 50-cent word called macroeconomics. Let's say macroeconomics. Macroeconomics. So now you can say, if you don't do anything else in the sermon, the preacher brought two big 50-cent words to you. Microeconomics, the business of individual choices and forces that weigh on how we use resources, and macroeconomics, the study of those aggregate choices, aggregate forces that affect how we as a collective society, as groups, as a globe use resources. Now, I probably would have gotten a C on an economics test. I think that's what I did make in economics. You may have heard about the leading schools of economics studying: Chicago, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, MIT, Stanford, Pennsylvania, UC Berkeley, London. But have you ever heard of the Lazzarus School of Economics? Well, I'd like to introduce you to the Lazzarus School of Economics. The Lazzarus School of Economics. The Lazzarus School of how resources are obtained and shared. Now, you need to begin by understanding that the Lazzarus School, like any good school, has a dean. And the dean of the Lazzarus School of Economics was a fellow named Jesus. The fellow named Jesus was having an economics lesson in the 16th chapter of Luke. As a matter of fact, if you read the 16th chapter of Luke, the whole chapter is about economics. It's a whole chapter. I just pulled one little piece of it out of there. But the first part of the chapter, you read about a fellow who, with a story we call the unscrupulous manager, the guy who was stealing from his boss, shading on the books, and he figured he's going to get caught, so he figured, I better make some friends with the folks who owe my boss so that when I get on hard times, I have somebody to take care of me. You know, there it was, unscrupulous economics. But and Jesus said, you need to understand how to have some connections with the people who run stuff so that you can have a safety net, a cushion. Well, he also shares this story about a guy named Lazarus and a rich man. According to Dean Jesus of the Lazzarus School of Economics, an unnamed rich man and a homeless, sick, raggedy, and hungry man named Lazarus lived in the same town. The rich man enjoyed all the comfort that his wealth allowed. Lazarus suffered a hellish existence from being hungry, homeless, sick, and ragged. Each man lived in the same area but had very drastically different experiences because they either enjoyed or lacked resources. Economics affected how they lived. Each man died. And I suppose that the rich man died in a comfortable setting because of his economics. Well, you know, when you have more, you can die easier. You can die in a comfortable kind of situation. You are attended. Your anguish is comforted. The rich man died in a comfortable setting because that was how he lived. Lazarus probably died hard because that's often the way homeless and hungry and raggedy and sick people die. Hard. Jesus said that after the rich man and Lazarus died, they experienced very different fates. But the lesson has a weird twist. The rich man in the afterlife was doomed to an agonizing existence. Lazarus in the afterlife enjoyed preferred status, comfortably among the faithful. Now, the weird part about this lesson isn't that the rich man and Lazarus had very different fates in the afterlife. After all, they had very different experiences in life. We shouldn't be surprised that they would have different experiences in the afterlife, given that they had a very different situation in life. What's weird is that in the afterlife, it was Lazarus, not the rich man, who found a measure of comfort. Lazarus, who had lived a wretched existence in poverty and sickness and despair, somehow found himself comforted among the faithful. Meanwhile, his unnamed, formerly wealthy and comfortable neighbor found himself in a miserable state of suffering. The tables were completely turned. The script was flipped. Tormented by his painful plight, the formerly rich, now miserably suffering man pleaded that the patriarch of paradise would dispatch Lazarus on a mercy mission, direct Lazarus to dip his finger in water, and drop in on him in his tormented state and apply soothing water to his lips. And the patriarch oddly declined the prayer. So much for God answering everybody's prayer the way they want. He also rejected the rich man's plea that Lazarus would be dispatched to warn his surviving family members. Well, if you're not going to send him to help me, send him to help my kinfolk. You know, some comfortable kinfolks, they're living comfortable too. I want them to be warned that this isn't the way you want to go. And the patriarch said, no, not going to send Lazarus to do that either. Well, what are some lessons from the Lazarus School of Economics that I should share? You understand you have a weird pastor, so your pastor would draw some lessons from this interesting story, and I just happened to drop these lessons on you. Lesson number one. The true test of how we use resources turns on what happens to Lazarus people. The true test of how we use resources, the true test of our living is how our resources affect life for Lazarus people. You see, people like Lazarus are all around us. As Dean Jesus said in his lesson, they are literally at our gates. That's what we read in the story. At his gate, at the rich man's gate, there lay a poor, ragged, hungry, sick man named Lazarus. Lazarus people are all around us. They are our sick neighbors without health care. There are elderly neighbors who are wondering, can I pay my light bill or do I need to not get as much medicine this time? They are our hungry neighbors of all ages and races and locations. They are our homeless neighbors sleeping under bridges and under whatever shelter they can find near and on this church campus. They are fearful brothers and sisters hiding from creditors because their mortgages are foreclosed. And they're wondering, how long will it be before they put me out of the house? There are emotionally wounded neighbors, scarred by traumas from brutality and addiction and war and other causes. Lazarus people all around us. Meanwhile, we got resources. I mean, we all have some measure resources. And the Lazarus mentioned by Dean Jesus represents anyone who is vulnerable, anyone who is without resources, anybody who is at the mercy of life because they don't have resources, and who is at the mercy of our mercy if we do have resources. The unnamed rich neighbor represents anyone who's comfortable with whatever measure of resources we have. We may not consider ourselves rich, but we're reasonably comfortable. We got a house over our head. We're more comfortable than somebody who doesn't have one. You got a job, you're a whole lot more comfortable than somebody who's looking for work. I have some friends, I have some relatives, I have some kinfolks who have been out of work for years. Not months, not weeks, years. The moral lesson is that disregarding our suffering neighbors brings a damning judgment. I know after Reverend Jeremiah Wright said damn in the pulpit, everybody went off. But you understand, if you understand your etymology, damn is the condensation of the word condemn. And you know, whenever you condemn something, you damn something. And whenever you damn something, you condemn something. So when you ever say something, damn this, you mean I condemn this. That's what it means. But you can't tell people on Fox News that. They just, they flunked grammar. And there are some churches where I'd be more upset because I gave a lesson in etymology and that said damn than it would because of the fact that it's something damnable about ignoring suffering people. That's the lesson in this lesson. Number one, there's something damnable about ignoring vulnerable people. There's nothing blessed about being blessed and then living as if you don't see folks who suffer. When folks say, I'm blessed, and walk right by folks who are suffering, that's being blessed in a damn kind of way. Dean Jesus told the story about the rich man and Lazarus to warn us about the moral impact and the consequences of our choice and decisions concerning resources. According to Dean Jesus, life has an economics final exam. It isn't defined by how you're doing on your stock options or how your pension fund is doing or what the London or New York or the Asian stock markets are doing. It isn't defined by corporate bottom line or the gross domestic product. It is especially important that we get this lesson these days. Because you see, we hear a whole lot about the economy. We're in a presidential campaign, so you know we're going to hear a whole lot about the economy this year. And Mr. Obama and Mr. Romney will spend billions of dollars this year apiece, telling us about their perspectives on the economy. You notice something? We haven't heard either of them talk about Lazarus people. Neither of them has talked about Lazarus people. Neither of them include Lazarus people in their speeches. I 10-time double dog dare you to do a Google search of all the speeches you've heard Mr. Romney and Mr. Obama say in the last campaign session and figure out how many times the word poor and poverty shows up. I'll give you an answer. None. Or as Grandma said, nan. Neither man visits places where Lazarus people lived. I just went to Oakland last week, and by the way, Reverend Dr. J. Alfred Smith sends his regard to New Millennium and says he wishes you well, had a good time out there. And we were talking, Dr. Smith and his son, Reverend Jeff Smith Jr., who's the pastor of Allen Temple Church. We were talking over dinner, and Pastor Smith Jr. said, when President Obama flies into San Francisco to collect money for his campaign stops, he visits with the people from Google and Apple and, and they raise big money. He never comes to Oakland. There's a lot of folks, Lazzarus people in East Oakland. There are a lot of Lazzarus people in San Francisco. Neither man is calling us to devote more resources for Lazzarus people. I smiled, but after I cringed when I heard Mr. Romney says, I'm really not concerned about the very poor. I wonder, has he not read about Lazzarus? The people vying to lead our nation appear more comfortable about what happens to the comfortable people like the rich man than to the people like Lazzarus. And as followers of Jesus, you and I are called to remind them and to remind our sisters and brothers who say they follow Jesus that God is concerned about Lazzarus people. That the love of God that we have been called into by God's grace calls us to have a holy concern for Lazzarus people. The Lazzarus people are around us so that we can show our concern for them in God's love. Lesson number 2. Lazzarus people deserve protection, not indifference or exploitation. In the story, you recall, Abraham, who was the patriarch of the faithful, reminded the formerly rich fellow who was suffering that he disregarded Lazarus during his lifetime. I love that how Jesus puts in the story, child, remember? Child, remember? During your lifetime, you enjoyed comfortable things, and Lazarus, in the same manner, suffered. Child, remember? During your lifetime, Lazarus didn't count. Child, remember? During your lifetime, Lazarus was at your gate, but you were indifferent. Child, remember? During your lifetime, you had the wherewithal to be merciful to Lazarus, and you didn't use it. Child, remember that during your lifetime, Lazarus languished in a suffering plight. Child, remember during your lifetime, Lazarus had need that was obvious and blatant and desperate, and you were simply indifferent. Child, remember? He remembered suffering only when he suffered. And that's the only time he calls Lazarus' name in the story. You notice the only time the rich man calls Lazarus by name in the story is when the rich man is in torment. And notice his attitude toward Lazarus, which had been indifferent during Lazarus' life, changed from indifference to exploitation. What can I get out of Lazarus? In other words, Lazarus is a tool. Lazarus had something he wanted. Lazarus had access to the mercy that the rich man wanted, and when he couldn't get Lazarus to wait on him, the rich man wanted Lazarus to go wait on his kinfolk. The rich man's indifference towards Lazarus challenges us to face how we tend not only to ignore obvious suffering, it also challenges us to notice how we tend to use people who suffer. We become so self-focused that we either don't notice or we don't care to do anything about notorious pain until we're in trouble, and then we want the folks who we stepped over to step up and help us. I'm sort of tickled at the folks who believe that we shouldn't have so much government spending, but the investment bankers who didn't want government spending wanted the government bailout on their banks. It's not right to spend government money when we're dealing with children who don't have food, or mothers who don't have shelter, or folks who don't have jobs. But gee whiz, I got a bank. I got a big bank. I pay big salaries in my big bank. My bank is in trouble. And guess what? I want you to take the tax money that you get from the working people to give it to us in the banking business. We're indifferent about how the government of Israel mistreats Palestinians. I love how Mr. Huckabee, former Governor Huckabee, is getting ready to go to another one of his trips to Holy Land. He won't go by the West Bank. You recall the Israelis have been bulldozing houses of Palestinians, taking settlements that were reserved for the Palestinians. Lazzarus people. We see that it's indifference in the technology park situation. Notice, you heard last week the state fair plans on staying in where it is, but they also plan to expand. Guess whose land they plan to take? Lazzarus people's land. They say they want to expand 51 acres to the east. Do your geography. You don't have Chenal, 51 acres to the east. You have Lazzarus people. Can you remember the people who were stranded in Katrina? Lazzarus people. Stranded on rooftops, stranded in a convention center. Whether we're indifferent because we don't care or for some other reason, this lesson exposes the moral evil and judgment on that indifference. We are responsible for each other, so we can't afford to be indifferent toward each other. If we are comfortable, we are morally obligated to care for the suffering. If we have jobs, we are morally obligated to care for people who are out of work. If we live in communities with vacant homes and homeless people, we're morally obligated to bring the homeless and the houses that are empty together. The house is not doing anything. Why can't the homeless live in them? And if we don't, or won't, let's not pretend we're following Jesus. Let's not say we've been saved by God's grace to tell our brothers and sisters without health care that we really rather they die than receive free access to health care. Let's not tell our unemployed brothers and sisters that we would rather go in debt as a society to build and buy more predator drones and buy more bombs to drop than long-term unemployment benefits. Let's not tell teachers and students that we'd really rather go in debt paying for prison guards and prisons than we would for good schools and good salaries. You understand the prison guard makes more money than a beginning teacher? Hello? In other words, let's remember the lesson from Lazarus is that we can not only fail to notice Lazarus people, we can exploit them. Where is the money going to go for? I'll conclude on this note. Everybody was real happy about the lottery. Suppose a big college education available? You know who buys lottery tickets? Lazarus people. So we are preparing college education for folks to go to get colleges and pay tuition. And guess who's getting the scholarships? Non-Lazarus people. It would be one thing if we were having the scholarships for the people who were Lazarus people, but we're giving the scholarships for folks who can afford to send their children to college. Well, preacher, what are you saying about this? Jesus shared a lesson about this and basically said, listen, be careful how you treat Lazarus people. Because the way you treat Lazarus people is the way God treats you. If you turn your back on Lazarus, people, then remember when final exam time comes, you can't ask God to grade on the curve. You know, there is a final exam, right? And we've all known those students who wouldn't do their homework and expected the teacher to grade on the curve if they please get me a C so I won't flunk this course. I want to graduate, and I just need a C. I know I didn't come to class. I know I didn't do the homework. I didn't study. But I want you to give me a C. And the lesson from the Lazzarus School of Economics is, as you treat Lazarus, so God views your life. And what that tells you and me is that our society, our religion, has some remedial education to do in the Lazzarus School of Economics. That's why we're here. You and I are students of the Lazzarus School of Economics. And in the name of Dean Jesus, we have been commissioned to go out and say to our world, we see Lazarus. In the name of Dean Jesus, we've been commissioned to go out and say to our world, we will not ignore Lazarus. In the name of Dean Jesus, we have been ordained to go out into our world and say, we will not let Lazarus people be exploited or mistreated. In the name of Dean Jesus, we say to our world, Lazarus people are our people because they matter to God. School's in session. Let's go teach.